Hello students, and welcome back to the third lecture of the block MEG 8 New Literatures in English, block 2 Agugiwa Thiong'o's A Grain of Wheat. I am Dr. Madhumita Chakraborty, an associate professor at the Zakir Hussain Delhi College Evening, University of Delhi. So today, we ended the last session in which we talked about a brief introduction to Kenyan literature. Now, of course, Kenyan literature is part of a larger literature, which is the literature which comes from the African continent. And in today's class, we are going to talk more about the modern novel in Africa. As we discussed in the previous class, when the Arabs came to Kenya, they brought the written script with them. When the Arabs came to Kenya, they brought the written script with them. And in all parts of Africa, there has been a long and enduring tradition of poetry and drama. But today, it is the novel, as almost everywhere else in the world, which is the dominant literary genre on the continent. The novel's privileged status as a written genre today may be attributed to European influence, or it may be attributed to its association with an imaginative consciousness which is grounded in the literate modernity. More so, the appeal of the novel has to do with the integrative function that narratives have always played in African society. A role that is well illustrated not only by the didactic and the reflexive purpose of folk tales and fables that inform the sensibility and define a primary level of imaginative faculty in traditional African societies, but also by the centrality of the mythical tale. The tradition that was primarily oral became written after the arrival of the first colonizers. The Arabic language was introduced into the African continent along with its script, and later, when the Europeans came, they introduced literacy in order to enable the local population to read the Bible. Later, the Europeans also introduced their own respective system of education, as a part of which Africans were exposed to their literatures. The British, for example, introduced as a part of their educational requirements texts like the Holy Bible and the Pilgrim's Progress, which in turn became the role models for all countries in the African continent. We can see that the history of written script or the history of written literature is very, very new. It's very, very recent. What had lasted for millions of years in the case of Africa was the oral tradition, or what we call orature. The oral tradition lasted for millions of years and in many cases still continues to be the only mode of creating stories or songs. In the course of time, there not only grew a sizable body of significant oral narratives, but also to accompany them groups of professional narrators, the griot, the babalao, and the gikandi players, who moved from place to place in various African societies and narrated these tales. These unwritten forms of literature are far less widely known and appreciated. They don't fall neatly into a rubric, into a box, into the familiar cultures of literate cultures as established by the Europeans. The oral literatures are harder to record and they're harder to present. And for a superficial observer, they are easier to overlook than the corresponding written material. The concept of an oral literature is an unfamiliar one to most people who have been brought up in cultures which, like those of contemporary Europe, lay stress on the idea of literacy and the written tradition. So in popular view, it seems to convey, on the one hand, the idea of mystery, of exotica, and on the other, of a crude and artistically undeveloped formulations. So what are the features of oral literature? Oral literature is by definition dependent on a performer who formulates it in words on a specific occasion. There is no other way that it can be realized as a literary product. The connection between transmission and the very existence of the literature is a much more intimate one in oral literature as opposed to written forms. So, without oral realization and without direct rendition by any singer or any speaker, an unwritten literary piece cannot easily be said to have continued or any independent existence at all. Another concept of oral literature is there is no concept of an authentic version. What is authentic? I tell you a story, you tell that story to a third person, he or she tells it to a fourth person. With every retelling, the story changes, yet it remains the same. The focus in oral literature, therefore, is on extempore, on elaboration, which are more likely to be on the fore than that of any form of memorization. There is repetition, there is revision. Stories are revised and tailored by the speaker according to the place and the audience. So, for example, if a story is being told to children, the speaker would tailor it, would speak about it. The language that would be used would be very different if the same story was being told in front of an adult audience. It was with the coming of the invaders, like the Arabs, as we've been saying, although some people came for trade alone as well, like the Chinese and the Indians, that written forms of narration were introduced into the cultural soil of Africa. Contrary to what is popularly thought, those who introduced scripts for the African languages were not the Europeans, but the Arabs. We keep repeating this because this is something that is often ignored. The Arabs came from the north to invade, convert, and set up kingdoms for continued economic exploitation, and we have already discussed this in quite a bit of detail in the previous video. So thus, Hausa, a language of the people living in the northern parts of Nigeria, acquired a script, which was the Arabic script, and also Swahili, which was primarily a trade language spoken on the coast from Mombasa to Zanzibar. It also became a written language with the help of the Arabic script. We discussed in the very first video how Swahili had been the language of Kenyan poetry for nearly 200 years in the written form. With the coming of the Europeans during the end of the 15th century, which was first the Portuguese under Vasco da Gama, this was perhaps one of the first European languages to be introduced in the continent of Africa. And within a couple of centuries after that, the entire continent had speakers speaking Portuguese, Dutch, English, French, German, Flemish, Italian. It became more of a multilingual society. The written missionaries who came to Africa, they came with the apparent pretext, as we know, of bringing civilization and enlightenment. We've already talked about it, the white man's burden, civilizing the savages. How did they do this? They started by a reading of the Bible. So they used to go and they used to sit within the communities and there would be Bible readings. Similarly, weekly church sermons were written by the priest to be read out every Sunday during church. Subsequently, the Bible was translated to different African languages. But how? We know that these African languages did not have a script. So what did the European missionaries do? They invented a script, or they adapted a script for these languages before such translations could be undertaken. Therefore, the so-called credit of transforming a large number of African societies from oral to written, from the pre-literate to the literate, goes to these missionaries. And these missionaries, they had their own agenda. We've been talking about this. They had their own agenda. They had their own construction of society. And therefore, they encouraged Africans to learn to read in the European languages. And therefore, gradually, the local people started to read and write in English, in French, in Portuguese, all of which was introduced by the missionary community. I spoke a while earlier about two books which were the primary books that the missionaries used. One is, of course, the Holy Bible, and which was translated into various languages of Africa, sometimes by inventing a script, as I just said. The other was The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. To control the continent for their economic exploitation, it was needed to control the minds of the people. It was important that the minds of the people be colonized. Hence, Ngugi wa Thiong'o's famous book, Decolonizing the Mind. The mind is colonized by which the Africans internalized their own inferiority and gradually came to believe that yes, it was the Europeans who were indeed responsible for lifting their status in life. Once the minds of the people were colonized, Western systems of education was introduced to instill into those minds this superiority. It was repeated ad nauseum in order that there would be no doubt at all in the minds of this people about the superiority, whether it is economic, political, social, cultural, or ideological, of the Western ways of life, thereby filling their minds with simultaneously with a sense of inferiority of all things and ideas that were African. Teaching and learning of European languages and literatures, whether it was English, whether it was Portuguese, whether it was French, became a part of the school education curriculum and also became a major status symbol in a way for a large number of Africans. The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan became an almost essential text in various parts of British Africa. It is therefore no surprise that when the first generation of Africans came to write their narratives in English, they were based largely on the Pilgrim's Progress and on the Bible. And these first generation of writers were known as the children of Bunyan, which were the first publications in English from Africa. One of the first publications which came out in English was E. Casely Hayford's Ethiopia Unbound, published in 1911, which is perhaps the first long narrative in prose by an African. The book is a hodgepodge of ideas in which the author, Casely Hayford, tries to focus on a number of contemporary issues, including education, Christianity, and colonialism. The modes of narration in the book vary from realistic at one point to fantastic at another. Many years later, in 1943, R.E. Obeng published his work 18 Pence. This is considered by many to be a step closer to what may be called the modern African novel, rather than Casely Hayford's Ethiopia Unbound. 18 Pence is an allegory in which the characters are representatives of various qualities. And the influence of the Bible and of Pilgrim's Progress is more obvious in 18 Pence than in Ethiopia Unbound. One of the earliest proper novels that was published in Africa was a novel called The Palm Wine Drinkard, which was published in the year 1952 by the Nigerian author Amos Tutuola. This was the first African novel published in English outside of Africa. It is a quest tale, meaning it is a tale based on a search and it is written based on Yoruba folk tales in a modified English or a pidgin English. When the book came out, the reviews were very mixed because the English of the book is not like the English that we speak today. It was broken. It was broken. It was repetitive, and the language was not something that a lot of people were familiar with at that point in time. So the reviews were mixed. Dylan Thomas felt that it was simply and carefully described. This is the quote. Simply and carefully described in what he called, quote unquote, young English. Other reviewers, however, were not so kind. They used terms like primitive, primeval, naive, unwilled, lazy, barbaric, barbaros to describe the book. Now, all these terms, remember, take us back to the idea that the white European had about Africa, which is why they felt it was their duty to civilize their savages, which is why they talked about the white man's burden. Now, when they see this literature in this kind of a pidgin English, they again felt that even now it was time for them perhaps to even teach them how to write. And the use of these words like primitive, primeval was very, very deliberate. A lot of African intellectuals also, thought that the book would not do a lot to promote the image of Africa outside the continent. They saw it as a book which was bad for Africa. They saw Tutuola as somebody who was merely a storyteller and who would just embellish stories for a given audience. It was many years later that critics began to value Tutuola's literary style as a unique exploration of the possibilities of African folklore instead of the more typical realist imitation of European novels in African novels. Therefore, one of the major contributions that Tutuola made was to forever kill any idea that, and I quote, Africans are copyists of the cultures of other races, end quote. Tutuola was therefore seen as a pioneer of a whole new literary form, which was based on an ancient verbal style. So, over a period of time, literary rejuvenation in Africa became part of a large cultural renaissance that had involved close links with the political struggles of various communities on other continents. An African writer therefore used his pen, not like the barrel of a gun, but he also carried a pen in one hand and a gun in the other, almost literally. People like Sedor Senghor, Agostino Neto, Mamadou Dia, Tawafa Bawela, Jomo Kenyatta, Kwame Nkrumah, they were not just front-ranking political leaders of their respective countries. They were also the leading writers as well. In South Africa, a lot of the major writers were speaking out against the apartheid regime. They knew the risks that they were undertaking. Many of them got their books banned. Many of them had to go into exile, which meant that while they were free to leave the country, the doors of their country were forever closed to them and they could never return back. So they were literally people who were writing with a pen in one hand and a gun with the other, the writer activist. The aims of these African writer novelists were therefore overtly political, and there were three principal reasons why they wrote, each of which was implied in the resolution that was quoted above. These writers were the first to bring out the rich cultural heritage of Africa to debunk the colonial propaganda that Africa had no culture, no history, no past, and that the Europeans had intervened in Africa to civilize it. Critics have called this phenomenon as the Prospero syndrome. The second aim of these writers was to set up the struggle for their cultural liberation. However, since no authentic cultural liberation was possible without political liberation, the third and the most significant aim of these writers was to support their respective national liberation movements. In this, they were inspired by the writings and the research of Cheikh Anta Diop from Senegal, about whom we have already discussed earlier. So the first African novel, in one way was Tutuola, and soon after that, of course, came Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, and that will be discussed in a later video. Thank you.